These are 20 hidden facts about The Longest Day that reveal the most expensive black and white film ever made generated nearly as much drama behind the cameras as the D-Day invasion it portrayed. Producer Darryl Zanuck bet $10 million in 1962, which equals $104 million today, and what he created was Hollywood's definitive D-Day account alongside enough behind-the-scenes chaos to match the beaches of Normandy. Actors who literally fought the battle they were recreating, buried tanks unearthed during filming, and production disasters that rivaled the invasion itself explain why this epic remains the benchmark for war cinema more than 60 years later. Fact number 1. Richard Todd played the man he helped rescue on D-Day. Film history's most extraordinary casting decision might be Richard Todd playing Major John Howard in The Longest Day, and the reason will give you chills. June 6, 1944, at exactly 12:40 in the morning, Lieutenant Richard Todd parachuted into Normandy with the British 6th Airborne Division, and his mission that night was reinforcing the forces that had seized Pegasus Bridge, forces commanded by Major John Howard himself. 18 years later, Todd stood before the cameras wearing his actual D-Day beret, and portraying Major Howard, which meant he was playing his own commanding officer from that night. The ground was the same, the bridge was the same, and Todd had lived through every moment he was now recreating under enemy fire that had been real the first time around. What Todd said later reveals his integrity as a soldier. "I think I prostituted myself a little bit with my role in that. I'm very glad I did it, but like many blockbusters, drama gets added. My main gripe is that in the film, the gliders got too much kudos, and not enough was given to the Paris." Decades after filming, he stayed loyal to his fellow paratroopers, feeling Hollywood had shortchanged their contribution to history. Major John Howard served as a military consultant on the film, advising on scenes depicting his own mission, which created the surreal experience of watching an actor who'd once been under your command now play you on screen and tell your story to the world. Fact number 2. One man climbed the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc twice 18 years apart. Joseph Lowe appeared in The Longest Day as Private Sparrow, one of the American Rangers tasked with scaling the 100-foot cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, and during filming, Lowe climbed those treacherous cliffs while cameras rolled just as the script required. But Joseph Lowe had done this before. The morning of June 6, 1944, Lowe was among the 2nd Ranger Battalion that assaulted Pointe du Hoc under withering German fire, with enemy soldiers shooting down at them and cutting their ropes. 225 men attempted the climb that day, and by the mission's end, only 90 were still able to fight. 18 years later, Lowe returned to Pointe du Hoc, not as a soldier but as an actor recreating his own heroism. The cliffs were the same, and the challenge was the same, but this time nobody was shooting at him, and this time the world would see what he and his brothers in arms had accomplished. Climbing those cliffs again while remembering the friends who didn't make it to the top that first time must have carried an emotional weight that staggered the mind. Lowe brought an authenticity to his performance that no amount of acting training could replicate, because he'd already earned the right to tell this story, and the film just gave him the platform. Fact number 3. They discovered a real D-Day tank buried in the sand. Truth turned stranger than any screenplay when the production crew's equipment hit something solid beneath the sand while preparing a section of beach near Pointe du Hoc for filming. The excavation revealed an actual American tank that had been buried there since 1944. 18 years this piece of history had been hidden beneath the beaches of Normandy, a ghost of the invasion waiting to be rediscovered, and the crew couldn't believe their luck. Mechanics went to work on the vehicle after they cleaned the tank, and after some repairs, the thing actually functioned. That genuine D-Day relic, a machine that had rolled onto those beaches during the actual invasion, was repositioned and used in scenes depicting British regiment movements. Audiences watching The Longest Day in theaters were seeing authentic history on screen without even knowing it, because that tank had been there on D-Day, and now it was playing itself in the greatest D-Day film ever made. How many other relics remain buried along those beaches, silent witnesses to one of history's most defining days, is the kind of question that sends chills down your spine. Fact number 4. Richard Burton and Roddy McDowall begged for work and did it for free. Early 1962 found Richard Burton and Roddy McDowall stuck in Rome, trapped in the endless production delays of Cleopatra while week after week they sat idle and that troubled production lurched from one crisis to another. Both actors were going stir-crazy with nothing to do. They picked up the phone and called Darryl Zanuck, who was busy making The Longest Day across Europe, and their message was simple: "We'll do anything. Just give us something to do." Zanuck, never one to turn down talented actors willing to work, told them to fly themselves to location. and Burton and McDowell each filmed their cameo appearances in a single day without asking for a penny. They worked for free just to escape the boredom of waiting around in Rome. Burton took a brief role as a Royal Air Force pilot while McDowell grabbed an equally small part, but both men brought their considerable talents to these tiny roles and added star power to an already star-studded production. They literally paid their own way to the set, performed their scenes, and went back to Cleopatra without compensation. How prestigious The Longest Day was considered becomes clear when you realize these were major stars willing to work for nothing just to be part of Zanuck's epic, and the sheer tedium of the Cleopatra production drove them to prefer working for free elsewhere rather than sitting around being paid in Rome. Fact number 5. The $15,000 Corsican beach scam. Darryl Zanuck prided himself on being a shrewd businessman, but even the savviest producers can get taken, and just before filming was set to begin on the beaches of Corsica, a man approached Zanuck with an official-looking demeanor and a serious problem. He claimed to represent the owners of the beaches where The Longest Day planned to shoot, and these private landowners were very concerned about the production. $15,000 immediately, or they would drive modern cars through every shot and ruin the period authenticity the film required. Facing a tight shooting schedule and not wanting delays, Zanuck paid the $15,000, but later he discovered the truth. There were no private beaches in Corsica, and the whole thing was a scam by someone who saw an opportunity to exploit a big Hollywood production and took it brilliantly. Zanuck wasn't the type to let it go, so he filed a lawsuit and pursued the matter for 8 long years before eventually winning damages and recouping his money. Picture the frustration of trying to make the most expensive black and white film in history while recreating the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted, and you've got con artists trying to shake you down on a Mediterranean island. This kind of headache doesn't make it into the behind-the-scenes documentaries, but mounting a production on this scale brings these realities every single day. Fact number 6. They had to keep nudists away from the invasion. Speaking of Corsica, the beach scam wasn't Zanuck's only problem on that island, because the location scouts had found perfect beaches for filming the invasion sequences, long stretches of sand that could convincingly double for Normandy. One small issue they didn't anticipate was the nudist colony located 2 miles inland from the beach. Picture trying to film the D-Day invasion with thousands of extras, period-accurate landing craft, and meticulously prepared sets when the last thing you need is naked people wandering into the frame because they decided to take a stroll to the water. Warning signs had to be posted by the production, asking the nudist colonists not to approach the water during filming, and imagine being the assistant director responsible for nudist control when that's not exactly in the job description. Location filming brings these realities whether you want them or not. The nudists cooperated fortunately, and no invasion scenes were photobombed by sunbathers in their birthday suits, but it's another one of those absurd real-world problems that emerge when you're trying to recreate history on a massive scale. War is hell, and film production in Corsica is apparently pretty complicated too. Fact number 7. Robert Mitchum shamed the extras into the cold water. Filming the Omaha Beach landing sequences brought Zanuck face to face with a rebellion when the extras, many of them actual soldiers provided by the military, took one look at the water and refused to jump from the landing craft. They were convinced the water would be freezing, and they weren't about to risk hypothermia for a movie no matter how important it was. Assistant directors tried persuading them while production managers offered incentives, but nothing worked, and the extras stood firm. They weren't getting in that water. Robert Mitchum, playing Brigadier General Norman Cota, watched this standoff with growing disgust because here were soldiers, or at least men in soldiers' uniforms, refusing to do something uncomfortable for a film, while the real men of Omaha Beach had jumped into freezing water under machine gun fire. Finally, Mitchum had had enough, and without a word he walked to a landing craft and jumped into the water himself, fully clothed. The silence on that beach must have been deafening. Here was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, a man who didn't have to do this, standing waist-deep in cold water and looking back at the extras with contempt. The soldiers had no choice because they couldn't let Robert Mitchum show more courage than they did, so one by one they jumped in. Mitchum never said a word about it afterward, because he didn't need to, and his actions had spoken loudly enough. Thanks to his willingness to get wet, Zanuck got his invasion scene. Fact number 8. John Wayne's $250,000 revenge. Charlton Heston desperately wanted the role of Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort in The Longest Day and pursued it actively, seeing it as a perfect fit for his talents, but at the last minute John Wayne decided he wanted the part. Bad blood existed between Wayne and Darryl Zanuck, because after Wayne's passion project The Alamo had flopped at the box office, Zanuck had publicly called him poor old Duke in the press, and that kind of insult doesn't sit well with a man like John Wayne. When Zanuck wanted Wayne for The Longest Day, the Duke saw his opportunity for payback because the standard salary for co-stars in the film was $25,000, and every other major actor including Robert Mitchum, Henry Fonda, Robert Ryan and Richard Burton was working for that rate. Wayne demanded $250,000, 10 times what anyone else was making, and by any measure it was highway robbery. Wayne himself later admitted as much when he said, "It was highway robbery, but I needed the money at the time, and that bastard Zanuck had it coming." Zanuck was trapped because he'd already announced Wayne for the role and the publicity machine was running, so he had no choice but to pay. The real Lieutenant Colonel Vandervoort was reportedly dismayed that someone so much older and overweight would portray him since Wayne was 54 years old during filming, 28 years older than Vandervoort had been on D-Day. Zanuck had wanted a star, and stars don't come cheap, especially when they're settling a score, and Wayne got his revenge for $250,000. And if that fact about Hollywood's biggest star demanding a role surprises you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Fact number 9. Christopher Lee was rejected for not looking military enough. One of the most ironic casting decisions in film history happened when Christopher Lee auditioned for The Longest Day, and the casting directors took one look at him and said no. Their reason was that he did not look like a military man. Christopher Lee, all 6 feet 5 inches of him, didn't look military enough for a war movie, and the absurdity becomes clear when you know Lee's actual war record. During World War II, Lee served in the Royal Air Force, but his service went far beyond that because he was attached to special operations units, the kind of assignments that remained classified for decades after the war. Lee himself rarely spoke about what he actually did during the war, noting that he'd signed the Official Secrets Act and took that commitment seriously. Years later, when Peter Jackson was directing The Lord of the Rings, Lee corrected him on what sound a man actually makes when stabbed from behind, and Jackson was startled by Lee's specific knowledge. Lee simply replied that he knew from experience. This was the man deemed not military enough for The Longest Day, though Lee, gracious as always, never held a grudge and understood that casting decisions are subjective. Those casting directors missed out on having one of the few actors in the film who actually knew what combat sounded like, smelled like and felt like, because sometimes the best soldiers don't look like Hollywood's idea of what a soldier should be, and Christopher Lee proved that throughout his real military service. Fact number 10. Samuel Fuller turned down the chance to direct the entire film. Before Darryl Zanuck settled on his unprecedented multi-director approach, he offered the entire film to one man, Samuel Fuller, and Fuller said no. This wasn't just any director turning down a project, because Sam Fuller was a D-Day veteran who had landed on Omaha Beach with the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, and he'd seen the real thing, survived the real thing, and knew what D-Day actually looked like, sounded like, and cost in human terms. Fuller had no time for Hollywood phony heroics, as he put it, and wanted to make his own personal war film, one that reflected his actual experiences without the compromises that would come from a big-budget studio epic. A $10 million production would require spectacle, stars, and commercial considerations that might dilute the truth he wanted to tell, and Fuller knew that. Almost 2 more decades passed, but Fuller eventually made that personal film when The Big Red One was released in 1980. It's a smaller film than The Longest Day, less expensive and less star-studded, but it's absolutely Fuller's vision, undiluted by studio demands. Cinema history has one of its great what-ifs here because we'll never know what The Longest Day would have looked like through Samuel Fuller's eyes. Fuller's decision to walk away from millions of dollars and prestige to preserve his artistic integrity tells you everything about the kind of man he was, and not everyone who fought at D-Day wanted to turn their experience into a Hollywood spectacular, because some truths are too personal to share that way. Fact number 11. Eisenhower wanted to play himself but couldn't look young enough. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe during D-Day and later President of the United States, initially expressed willingness to appear in The Longest Day playing himself. Imagine the actual architect of Operation Overlord recreating his own decisions, his own D-Day for the screen. An insurmountable problem existed though, and that problem was makeup. Eisenhower in 1961 was 70 years old, while on D-Day he'd been 53, and the makeup artists looked at Eisenhower and concluded there was simply no way to make him appear 17 years younger convincingly. The production found an alternative in Henry Grace, a set decorator who happened to be a dead ringer for the younger Eisenhower, and Grace took the role while the film moved forward. Eisenhower's involvement didn't end there, because he agreed to attend a screening of the film once it was completed, and the production team must have been nervous since having the actual Supreme Commander watch their recreation of his greatest military achievement carried enormous pressure. According to multiple sources, Eisenhower sat down to watch The Longest Day with great anticipation, and then after only a few minutes he stood up and walked out of the screening. Fact number 12. Eisenhower walked out of the screening in frustration. Inaccuracies drove Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had been willing to play himself, and who had lived through every moment of D-Day, to walk out of a screening of The Longest Day after just minutes. The film, for all its massive budget and attention to period detail and military advisors, still got things wrong, and Eisenhower, who knew exactly what had happened on June 6, 1944, couldn't sit through a Hollywood version that deviated from the truth he'd lived. We don't have a detailed record of which specific inaccuracies bothered him most, but perhaps it was the sanitized version of Omaha Beach, where the film couldn't show that 80% of the first wave died, a horror that wouldn't be accurately depicted until Steven Spielberg made Saving Private Ryan 36 years later. Perhaps it was errors in the timeline, or the portrayal of command decisions, or any of 100 small details that only someone who'd been there would notice. The ultimate irony is this: The Longest Day is widely considered one of the most accurate D-Day films ever made. Historians and military experts praise its authenticity. The National World War II Museum calls it the ultimate D-Day film, and it was selected for the National Film Registry in 2020 for being culturally and historically significant, and yet the man who planned D-Day couldn't watch it. No matter how much research you do, no matter how many advisors you hire, no matter how much money you spend, there's a difference between recreating history and living it. Eisenhower lived it while the film, magnificent as it is, could only recreate it. Fact number 13. Kenneth More carried the actual D-Day Shiliga. Among the many authentic details in The Longest Day, one of the most personal was a prop that wasn't a prop at all, because Kenneth More, playing Captain Colin Maude, carried a blackthorn shiliga, an Irish walking stick, throughout his scenes depicting the Juno Beach landing. That stick was the real thing. Captain Colin Maude, the actual officer Moore was portraying, lent the actor the very same blackthorn shiliga he had carried ashore at Juno Beach during the real invasion. And for 18 years Maude had kept that stick, a personal memento of the longest day of his life. He trusted Kenneth More to carry it again, this time for the cameras. The weight of that moment goes beyond description, because Moore wasn't just holding a period-appropriate prop, but holding a piece of history, an object that had been there during the actual invasion. When Moore stepped off the landing craft with that shiliga in hand, he was connecting directly to the man whose story he was telling. That stick survived D-Day and survived 18 years after the war, and today it's on display at the D-Day Story Museum in Portsmouth, England, where visitors can see the actual shiliga that Captain Colin Maude carried on June 6, 1944, and that Kenneth More carried in the greatest D-Day film ever made. These kinds of connections, these threads linking past to present and reality to recreation, make The Longest Day more than just a movie, because it's a memorial. Fact number 14. French civilians threw stones at actors in German uniforms. The production of The Longest Day required hundreds of extras to dress in German Wehrmacht and SS uniforms, and for historical accuracy, these costumes were meticulously researched and faithfully recreated, while the actors and extras wearing them were just doing their jobs and playing roles. Not everyone in France saw it that way. French civilians who had lived through the Nazi occupation, who remembered German soldiers marching through their streets, who had lost loved ones to the occupation. These people saw those uniforms and reacted with the emotions they'd been carrying for 18 years. They threw stones at the actors. It didn't matter that these were just extras in costumes, or that this was just a movie, because those uniforms represented years of oppression, humiliation, loss and suffering, while the wounds were still raw and the memories were still vivid. Security for actors in German uniforms had to be arranged by the production, and their movements had to be scheduled carefully, keeping them away from populated areas when possible. What should have been a routine aspect of a period war film became a constant source of tension. This wasn't the first time this had happened in post-war French film production, and it wouldn't be the last, but it serves as a powerful reminder that World War II wasn't ancient history to the people of France in 1962, because it had ended only 17 years earlier. For the French civilians who threw those stones, the war would never really end, and those actors in German uniforms walked away at the end of the day's shooting, while the French people who attacked them had to live with their memories forever. Fact number 15. Red Buttons was cast in a Paris cafe. Hollywood loves stories about actors being discovered in soda fountains or spotted on street corners, and Red Buttons casting in The Longest Day follows that tradition, except it happened in a Paris cafe. Darryl Zanuck was in Paris during pre-production, likely dealing with the 1,000 details that go into mounting a $10 million international production, and Red Buttons, the comedian and actor who'd won an Academy Award for Sayonara 5 years earlier, happened to be in the same cafe. They ran into each other by chance and started talking, and by the time their coffee was finished, Buttons had landed a role in the film. No formal audition, no screen test, no agent negotiations, just two men having a conversation that turned into a casting decision. Buttons ended up playing Private John Steele, the paratrooper whose parachute caught on the church steeple in St. Mary-Église and left him dangling helplessly while the battle raged below. It's one of the film's most memorable scenes, a moment that perfectly captures both the absurdity and terror of war. And it all happened because Red Buttons decided to get coffee in the right cafe at the right time. A film that took 10 months to shoot, that involved 4 simultaneous filming units, that coordinated thousands of extras and dozens of locations across Europe. Sometimes the biggest breaks come from the smallest coincidences. Fact number 16. The author and producer hated each other from their first meeting. When Darryl Zanuck purchased the film rights to Cornelius Ryan's book The Longest Day, he thought he was getting an incredible source of research and historical detail, since Ryan's book was meticulous, and he'd read all 240 books published about D-Day, while conducting 700 interviews with survivors across North America and Europe. What Zanuck didn't anticipate was that he and Ryan would immediately, deeply, and permanently hate each other. From their very first meeting, the two men clashed because Ryan was a journalist and historian who cared about accuracy above all else, while Zanuck was a showman who understood that a $10 million film needed to entertain audiences, not just educate them. Their visions for what The Longest Day should be were fundamentally incompatible. The situation became so toxic that editor Elmo Williams had to physically shuttle script pages between the two men, and Ryan would write. Williams would take the pages to Zanuck. Zanuck would make his notes and changes. Williams would return the marked-up pages to Ryan. Back and forth, with Williams serving as an intermediary because Ryan and Zanuck literally could not be in the same room together productively. 5 different scripts emerged from this contentious process before they finally had something everyone could live with, though live with might be overstating their enthusiasm. The miracle is that anything good came from this collaboration, because two men who despised each other, who fought over every detail, somehow produced a film that would be selected for the National Film Registry 58 years later. Maybe that tension, that push and pull between Ryan's historical accuracy and Zanuck's cinematic vision, is exactly what made The Longest Day work, and sometimes the best art comes from the most dysfunctional collaborations. Fact number 17. 66 hours of film edited down to 3 hours. Picture 4 film crews shooting simultaneously across Europe for 10 months with multiple directors handling different segments, thousands of extras recreating history's largest amphibious invasion, 31 separate locations, and 47 interior sets constructed specifically for this production. The result was 66 hours of raw footage. That's nearly 3 full days of film, and if you sat down and watched everything that was shot for The Longest Day without breaks, you'd need to dedicate your entire weekend plus another day. From those 66 hours, the editorial team had to create a coherent, compelling film, and they worked for months reviewing footage, making cuts, and shaping the narrative. Scenes that took days to film hit the cutting room floor, while performances that actors had poured their hearts into never made the final version, and entire subplots disappeared. When they finished, they'd carved those 66 hours down to approximately 3 hours, or to be precise, 179 minutes. Less than 5% of what they shot made the final cut, which means for every minute you see in The Longest Day, there are 19 minutes gathering dust in a vault somewhere. Epic productions of that era commonly shot far more than they'd use, and directors and producers knew this going in, but 66 hours is extraordinary even by those standards. It speaks to the ambition of the project, the scale of the production, and the challenge of trying to capture an event as massive as D-Day. Imagine being in that editing room, knowing that you had enough footage to make 20 different movies, and having to choose which pieces best served this particular story, and every decision meant letting go of something else, something that someone had worked hard to create. Fact number 18. The Paris premiere was a 6-hour gala event. When The Longest Day premiered in Paris on September 25, 1962, Darryl Zanuck didn't just rent a theater and show the film but orchestrated a 6-hour gala event that was itself as epic as the film being celebrated. 6 hours, and the film itself runs 3 hours, which means there were 3 additional hours of festivities surrounding it. The premiere took place at the Palais de Chaillot, the grand venue overlooking the Eiffel Tower. And this wasn't a standard red carpet affair but a celebration designed to honor not just the film but the actual veterans and the historical event it depicted. One of the highlights of this marathon event was a concert by Edith Piaf, the legendary French singer whose voice had become synonymous with French resistance and resilience during the war, and having Piaf perform at the premiere of a D-Day film was symbolically perfect since her presence connected the film to the actual French experience of occupation and liberation. Imagine being at that premiere, arriving in the late afternoon, watching the sun set over Paris, experiencing the film's 3-hour recreation of D-Day, then emerging into the night for more tributes, speeches, and celebration. It would have been exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. The Paris premiere set the tone for how The Longest Day would be received, not as mere entertainment, but as a significant cultural and historical event, and when the film opened in the United States on October 4th at the Warner Theater in New York, it carried the momentum of that extraordinary Paris debut. Fact number 19. The film was added to the National Film Registry in 2020. For nearly 60 years, The Longest Day has stood as Hollywood's definitive D-Day film. But in 2020, it received official recognition of its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance when the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. This honor isn't given lightly because each year the National Film Registry selects only 25 films for preservation, movies deemed to be important parts of American cultural heritage, and the films chosen must be at least 10 years old and possess cultural, historic, or aesthetic importance. The Longest Day joined an elite group that includes Casablanca, The Godfather, Citizen Kane, and other acknowledged masterpieces of American cinema, and the Library of Congress recognized that Zanuck's film wasn't just entertainment, but a historical document, a work of art, and a memorial all combined. The timing of this recognition carries particular poignancy, because by 2020 nearly all the D-Day veterans had passed away, and the men who lived through June 6, 1944 were gone. The Longest Day became even more important as one of the few remaining connections to that generation's experience of the war. The Library of Congress has scheduled a special D-Day anniversary screening of the film on June 6, 2025, continuing to honor both the film and the event it depicts. Think about the journey this film has taken, because in 1962 some critics worried it was too long, too expensive, too ambitious, but by 2020 it was recognized as an essential piece of American cultural heritage worth preserving for all future generations. Fact number 23. Future James Bond actors appeared in the film. If you watch The Longest Day carefully, you'll spot not 1 but 3 actors who would go on to become part of the James Bond franchise, though you might not recognize them as the villains and heroes they'd later become. Sean Connery appears in the film in what would be his last role before being cast as James Bond, and within months of The Longest Day wrapping, Connery would begin filming Dr. No and launch the most successful spy franchise in cinema history. But in The Longest Day, he's just one of many soldiers storming the beaches. Then there are the 2 German actors who would later become iconic Bond villains, and Gert Frube, who appears in a German officer role, would go on to play Auric Goldfinger in Goldfinger, one of the most memorable villains in the entire Bond series. His line, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die," would become one of cinema's most famous villain quotes. Kurt Jürgens, another German actor in The Longest Day, would later play Karl Stromberg in The Spy Who Loved Me, another classic Bond villain. In this one film you have the future James Bond and 2 future Bond villains, all appearing years before anyone involved had any idea about their Bond futures, and it's one of those coincidences that makes film history fascinating. What makes it even more interesting is that Connery and the 2 German actors never share a scene in The Longest Day, because the film's multi-perspective structure keeps the Allied and German storylines largely separate. They were all part of the same massive production, but their paths never crossed on screen. Years later, when Connery was firmly established as Bond and Frube had played Goldfinger, did they ever talk about their time together on The Longest Day? And did they laugh about the strange journey that took them from the beaches of Normandy, or at least the beaches pretending to be Normandy, to the glamorous world of international espionage? From Richard Todd playing the officer he'd served under on the actual D-Day, to Joseph Lowe climbing those cliffs twice in his lifetime, from buried tanks discovered in the sand, to John Wayne's $250,000 revenge, The Longest Day proves that sometimes the stories behind the camera are as remarkable as the story on screen. Darryl Zanuck's $10 million gamble, made at a time when that sum could bankrupt a studio, paid off spectacularly because the film earned $50 million worldwide and has influenced every major war film made since. When Steven Spielberg wanted to make Saving Private Ryan, he looked to The Longest Day as the standard to meet or exceed. Beyond its box office success and its influence on other films, The Longest Day serves a purpose that grows more important with each passing year, because the men who stormed those beaches are gone now, and the veterans who could tell us firsthand what D-Day was like have taken their stories with them. Films like The Longest Day, especially this film with its commitment to authenticity, its use of actual veterans as actors and consultants, its genuine artifacts like Colin Maud's Shillelagh and that tank buried in the sand, these become more than entertainment and transform into memory. In 2020, when the Library of Congress added The Longest Day to the National Film Registry, they recognized this and understood that 60 years after its premiere, this film had transformed from a commercial epic into a historical document, a work of art that helps us understand not just what happened on June 6, 1944, but what it meant to the men who were there. The production may have been chaotic, with Zanuck and Ryan hating each other, with nudists threatening to wander into shots, with con artists extorting money from the producer, with Eisenhower walking out of screenings in frustration, but somehow from all that chaos came a film that has endured for more than 6 decades as the definitive cinematic portrayal of The Longest Day. If you enjoyed learning these hidden facts about The Longest Day, hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your favorite moment from the film, and subscribe for more deep dives into classic cinema. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your subscription helps keep them alive for new generations to discover.